Reader, hey, come. Well, don't come closer. I'm already filling up the entire frame. But it is time to talk about my April wrap-up. So I don't know when this video is going to be coming to you. I am filming this a little bit out of order so that I can talk about these books when they're still fresh in my mind, because I'm already worried about how I'm going to do my March wrap-up, because knowing me, I will have forgotten a lot about half of those books probably. So the month of April was a month in which I've got quite a lot of things read. I mean, in theory, I think I only read one book more than I've read in the previous months, so I've read 10 books rather than 9, but it definitely felt like I was reading a whole ton, but at the same time it also felt like I wasn't getting through the books that I wanted to get through either, because I had some that seemed to linger forever on my TBR as well. But so yeah, 10 books, a little under 31,000, no, not 31,000, Jesus, that would have been an amazing month, 3,100 pages. So on track for the 100 pages a day benchmark. That's basically what I kind of keep in mind, that should be the average of what I read in order for me to be having a normal reading period. But so let's just go through the books. So the first thing that I finished in the month of April was a book called Interesting Facts About Space by Emily Austin. So in the month of April I was also taking part in Magical Readathon. I chose The Calling of Spacetronaut. You can see my reading vlogs as well if you want a more organic way of me going through these books as the month was progressing, but basically for Spacetronaut it meant that I've been reading quite a fair bit of sci-fi. I did read some other stuff as well, but not all of them ended up counting, because I did also misinterpret the complementary reading that you could do for Spacetronaut. So I thought you could like inexhaustibly use those prompts, but you could only use those prompts once, and so I basically had chosen Spacetronaut with the idea that I could read a ton of stuff on the TBR for it, and that ended up not being the case. So let's just go into what I ended up reading. So 10 books. First book, as I indicated, was Interesting Facts About Space. So Interesting Facts About Space is a book that definitely made me feel paranoia at certain times, made me feel like I was being watched or observed, and those are definitely the feelings of the character that were very much transmitted through this book. So our protagonist is a woman who is working for the space agency, not entirely sure like which section of the space program or whatever, but so basically she's doing some sort of a data entry, not really entry, data analysis type of job over there. She is somebody who I would say is autistic coded, definitely neurodivergent in any case, and she has sort of like difficulties with, you know, like the normal interactions, or knowing what people expect the answer to be or the reaction to be. And she also has a trauma when it comes to bald men, and one of her new co-workers at work is a bald man, and she is supposed to ask for his help in a problem that she is running into with her program, and she will be spending most of the book trying to avoid him at all costs. This book sees her developing a large level of paranoia and, you know, like the fear of being pursued. In Dutch we say achtervolgingswaanzin. But so basically she ends up thinking that somebody is like getting into her apartment and watching her when she's in her apartment and things like that. And that sort of feeling and that paranoia really starts to spiral towards the latter half of this book, and that I definitely felt. So to some extent this book was very anxiety inducing, but I definitely did enjoy it. I wouldn't say it's like the most amazing book that I've read, but I wouldn't say enjoy is the correct word, of course, because it gave me so much anxiety, but I definitely think that it did a really good job of, you know, letting the reader experience what the character was doing, and I did enjoy the resolvement of the book towards the end. Next, it was time for a little readathon that I host every 3 months, in which we read short books. And so during that weekend I read, first of all, Tiananmen 1989 Our Shattered Hopes by Lun Zhang, Adrian Combo and Amesian. This is a graphic novel, and it talks about the events that took place on Tiananmen in 1989. So if you are not aware with Chinese history, so in 1989 there was a student uprising that lasted for a very long time, in which students, for example, went on hunger strike. The authorities tried to get the students the exit the square, and when the students failed to do so, in the end they used brute force. So a dark page in Chinese history, and this graphic novel is basically just an accounting of it. I would definitely say that it's more of a non-fiction memoir, and if you already know the events of Tiananmen, then there are definitely also more impactful reads that you could read about what happened in Tiananmen. I definitely think that this one was sort of like, okay, yeah. It kind of, you know, it's a nice introduction into Tiananmen, but it's ultimately I've read a fair few books that deal with this section of Chinese history. Like most of them deal with a longer section of Chinese history than just Tiananmen. But yeah, this was, for me, this therefore like didn't do much as a result, because it was basically just like an accounting of the facts that I was already familiar with. To the extent that I even at some times was just like thinking, have I already read this book and I just forgot to log it? But I assume that is not the case. Next up we have The Subtle Art of Folding Space by John Chu. This is a book that my brain could not handle most of the time. And honest to God, now I'm also already like, what was happening in this book? This is a book in which our protagonist is working in the maintenance crew of basically the mechanical side of what holds the universe together. She is working there to kind of what do we say, fix certain elements to the construction, and in the beginning of this novel they find out that there's actually been some tampering with the construction of the universe, and that there are certain things that have gone wrong. Our protagonist has a very toxic relationship with her sister because her mother is about to pass away. Her mother is on her deathbed, or has passed away in the meantime. She has passed away, but during the time in which she was very ill, our protagonist was too far away to regularly visit her mother, and her sister kind of resents her for that. But on the other hand, her sister was also somebody who was kind of like intent on taking sole care of their mother, and like seems on the side of our protagonist, it seemed like she didn't really welcome any help in that, and that she wanted to kind of step away with all of the like honor for being the one, like the conscientious daughter who had done the Chinese duty of taking care of your elders. And our protagonist, and so this toxic relationship with her sister will also play a role throughout the story. This story deals a lot with sort of like universe building, like world hopping more or less, weird concepts that have to do with the word quantum, and when the word quantum is involved, my brain goes like beep. So yeah, when it comes to the actual world building of this book, I was very often lost, but I did enjoy the story overall, and I definitely enjoyed this exploration of the relationship between her and her sister. And I just thought of oh yeah, and this is definitely a book that you need access to Asian food when you're reading this, okay? Because this has amazing Asian food in it, and whenever they were eating, I was just like, oh, I want Asian food right now. I also started another book during Read It Short, but it will be a few books down the line, because it was not the next thing that I finished. The next thing that I finished is a book that I also felt like I had been reading forever, and then I finally finished it within the month of April, and that is The Ashfire King by Chelsea Abdullah. This is the sequel to The Stardust Thief, the second book in the Sandsea trilogy, and this is a book that I've been waiting for forever to read. I think there are 3 years between the publication of the first book and the publication of this sequel, and yeah, I had been waiting for this book all this time, and unfortunately this did kind of disappoint me in the sense that I was just not as invested. I was not as gripped or engaged. Also during my reread of The Stardust Thief, I was just less invested as I had been for the first one. So The Stardust Thief is a book in which we're looking at the Midnight Merchant, who's a girl called Luli, who basically is dealing in Jinn artifacts. In secret, she is dealing in Jinn artifacts because she has a Jinn sidekick who is basically a guy who found her at the most darkest point in her life, and he is a Jinn, and Jinn are very much hunted within this world, and so his Jinn presence cannot be known. However, her prowess at finding Jinn artifacts gets her the attention of the Sultan of this world, and so the Sultan kind of hires her on a mission to take his son Omar to someplace in the desert and go and look for a very powerful Jinn artifact. However, Omar is not that interested in accompanying Luli on this mission, so he secretly swaps places with his little brother. Maron is his name? Maron? No, Mason. Mason, and Mason is an adventurer at heart who, due to his role as a prince of the realm and especially like the favorite of his father, has basically not been able to explore the outside as much as he wants to, even though he's been secretly sneaking out. And so this is this is an adventure fantasy dealing with Jinn magic, and so sort of like Middle Eastern setting, and you know, like myths or legends. Are these legends? They're not myths, right? More like legends. And so, or folklore, let's just call it folklore in general, right? And so I do enjoy those aspects of it, but this book also does something that I don't tend to enjoy all that much when it happens in stories, and that's not to say that I don't understand the reasoning behind it, and that I wouldn't say that sometimes it's just needed for the overall plot. It's just never my favorite, and that is when certain sort of like when a big cast of characters kind of splits up into different groups. I just want my characters to be together, okay? And so most of this book I was just waiting for the moment for our character or full cast of characters to be together again. The next thing that I finished is the Stardust Grail by Yumi Kitase. This is my first Yumi Kitase, but I've had quite a few books of theirs on my sort of like radar because I think the covers for them are always super glorious. So we have our protagonist, Maya, I want to say her name is. Let's go with that. Our protagonist, Maya, is basically going through some university studies at the moment, but she's really kind of falling behind because she isn't all that invested in her studies or in the research that she's doing. She used to run in this sort of like crew that was doing all of these heists, and she's now kind of sort of like cleaned up her act. However, when this story kind of begins, she's contacted by a professor from the Yale University who lets her know that there are cracks in the universe, basically. There are these planet type instances that are referred to as nodes, which are being destroyed or they are dying out, and they don't know what is causing this, but they need a solution for this. They need to find a way to fix this, and they think that the Grail, which is a sort of like secret item that is holy to the Fenro civilization, the Fenro civilization who is responsible for the existence of this, I don't even know, this universe, I guess. It's not really the universe, but there's this sort of entity that the nodes are part of that is like very advanced and that the humans don't actually know how it functions, and so that dying out, they think that this sort of like secret artifact of the Fenro will help them restore balance to the universe, let's say. And so Maya goes on an adventure with her previous criminal crew leader, Uncle, who is one of these Fenro. This story is a adventure sci-fi that looks at some more difficult thematics as well, dealing with victimhood and predatorship and how, you know, over the course of history these roles can shift, and so when somebody being a victim at one point in time doesn't mean that they couldn't have been a predator at other times, and that means that, you know, like placing blame and things like that are always nuanced things and are always things that, you know, you need to look at the context for of the moment and not really take the whole history into account at all times, I guess. And this also kind of looks at, you know, like betrayal, at communal conscious versus individual decision. And yeah, aside from that, it also is like an uncovering of a mystery of this secret route that a past crew at one point took, and of which only a journal now survives, and nobody knows like what happened to them or where they went, and that is also something that we will be uncovering throughout this story. I enjoyed it. I wouldn't necessarily say it was like a 5-star or anything like that. I think I also just gave it maybe like 3.75. Yeah, exactly what I gave it apparently. So it is not an immediate favorite or anything like that, but I did have a good time with it. I will say that I was kind of distracted throughout this one, I feel like, on the bicycle, and that this one could potentially have warranted, like could have benefited from a closer reading, maybe in the physical format. The next thing I finished is that book that I had started for Read It Short, and that is The Wax Child by Olga Raven, which is a historical literary fiction about the witch trials. I think in Denmark. I think Olga Raven is Danish. Yeah, Denmark. 17th century, and so we're following this noble woman called Christense, who is accused of witchcraft, and so it's a lot about, I mean, I don't actually know what it is about. It kind of looks at this sisterhood of women looking out for one another, and the suspicions that are raised when women do this, when women gather together and there is no male presence, or whether they gather together and tackle male injustice and things like that. So I didn't enjoy it. It is, I don't know how to describe it. It is just like, it is not a full out narrative iteration. We don't follow a story from from point A to point B. We kind of get facts, anecdotes, scenes. They are interspersed with these sort of like descriptions of folkloric traditions, of spells, of cures or like potion making and things like that, to weave a tapestry of women wisdom from those times and women wisdom that was seen as heresy. But ultimately I was just like, what is this book trying to do? And I never really got there, so I didn't end up having a good time with this one. I am still going to give The Employees by Olga Raven a go, because I've heard so many good things about that one, and that is more on the sci-fi side of things, so hopefully that will just be a very different experience. But unfortunately, this first experience with Olga Raven didn't really work for me. Then I read The Dream Hotel by Leila Lalami, and this was another 5-star read. I enjoyed this one a whole lot, but enjoyed is once again the wrong word to use with this book, because this is also anxiety inducing, desperation inducing, anger inducing. I've never been more angry with a book than I was with this book, and most of the time. But so this is a society in our future in which basically the algorithm and all of the things that are, all of the information that is gathered about us is used against us to some extent, because it is used to assess our danger rate. You know, how likely are we to pose a danger to another member in society. And if your danger score goes too high, then you run the risk of being detained and placed in this detainment facility for re-evaluation. And this is what happens with our protagonist. Our protagonist is coming back from a congress in London, and when she is arriving back in the airport, she is flagged as a person with a too high risk score. The interview she has after that, she is basically just like very stressed out about the fact that her husband has to wait for her now. She's trying to get this over as fast as possible, and in so doing she probably comes across as a little bit more forceful than the pliant lenient, subversive woman that they want to have in front of them, and so they end up putting her in the detainment facility. And this book is a chronicle of her time there and of the system that is basically there to maintain the status quo, to keep them there as long as possible. We find out some background stuff about that as well halfway through, which kind of changes your perspective on things even further. But even without that, I would say it is just like a masterclass in bureaucratic bullshit and a way for the system to gain to get, and a way for our capitalist world to, you know, profit from these women, from their presence there, because they are there, they get to do these jobs, and if they do these jobs they can get money that they can then use to call their relatives, for example, to buy certain products that can make their life a little bit more comfortable. All of these things are rights that they can attain, but they're not rights that they automatically have. And if you don't get a job, your husband outside basically has to pay for you to be able to do these things, because you don't just automatically have a right to call them. If you don't have any money in your account anymore, you don't. And so the system benefits twice from you. It benefits from your labor, and then it also benefits from the money that you're putting into their account. And so they are ultimately always going to benefit from keeping people there longer rather than getting rid of them sooner. And so yeah, this is just, it reminded me a lot of The Handmaid's Tale, just because of its sort of like feeling of a woman trapped in a system that is designed to keep her in her place, in a system that wants to have her be submissive and just like cringe and not talk back and just take it as they want her to. And the desperation that this is more, and what this book does more, I feel like, than The Handmaid's Tale did, I think, but it's also just been a few decades since I read The Handmaid's Tale, is that this definitely gets to a point where you just feel the despair of this character of being stuck there for such a long time, while at home she has two newly born twins. I mean, they're maybe a year old or so at the time of that she goes into incarceration, but knowing that her life is passing her by, feeling more and more estranged from her children, from her husband, from the outside world. Yeah, I thought it was a masterclass. Next, we go to something light, because it was definitely needed at that point in time, and that is The Faraway Inn. Something stuck to it. The Faraway Inn by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a cozy fantasy about a girl who basically is spending the summer at her aunt's inn in some remote place, and when she arrives there, she is initially immediately shocked by the state of the inn, because it's not like she remembers it from her childhood. But then also her aunt is not that happy to see her there neither. Her aunt basically is like, yeah, I give you a few days to kind of, recover from the long journey you took to get here, but then you have to go again. So our protagonist is determined to kind of try and prove her usefulness to her aunt, because she sees the state of the inn. She's like, I can be of use here, I can definitely help out and patch things up, but there are also these weird things that seem to be going on with the inn as well, that we will be uncovering throughout this book. And so yeah, that was just, like a cozy fun fantasy. I wouldn't say it's anything special. It is also, it's not a book that swept you so much off of my feet that I was like, oh my god, I need to know what happens next. I need to read every single page of it. I need to devour it every second of the day. But I had a fun time with it, and it did what I expect this genre to do. Next up, the book that I spent most of my month with, and in the end I went to Everend, downloaded Everend again, got a free trial for 30 days just to have access to this audiobook, because it was just like, I need to get through this. And the problem had been the physical read apparently, because once I switched to the audiobook, I still was able to keep my full attention on it, but it also was flying by much quicker and I was getting through more pages, because whenever I was physically picking it up, like within the first 10 pages, I would feel myself falling asleep. So like, it must be something with the writing style that just doesn't tax me as much when I'm listening to it, rather than actively having to examine each word, I guess, because otherwise I don't know what it is. But that is The Beheading Game by Rebecca Lehman. This is a book about Anne Boleyn. It is about Anne Boleyn after she has been beheaded. So basically, Anne Boleyn, after her beheading, wakes up in the tower, her head on the floor, and the story takes off from there. But the problem with that is that most of the story is not about what happens after Anne Boleyn lost her head and wakes up again. It is mainly about what came before. And I don't know, it's not even that I've consumed so much media about this, right? I've read Queen Bee by Juno Dawson, which is about this. I've seen The Other Boleyn Girl, which is about this. I've seen like the series Elizabeth, which is about the daughter of Anne Boleyn. I must have seen some other things which are about Anne Boleyn, but it's not like I've devoured like 10,000 books about the subject neither. But what was my main interest in the concept of this story was kind of seeing like, what is Anne gonna do now? How is she going to respond? What are her actions now? And this just went too much into retrospective thinking about how she had ended up there, her relationship with Henry, her relationship with Thomas Cromley, with Jane, and all those things. And so ultimately I didn't enjoy it enough. In the end, it's not a bad book or anything like that, it just didn't do what I wanted it to do. The final sort of section of this book does dive into what I wanted it to do, and then I definitely had a much better time with it, but I was just not down for the retrospective stuff apparently. Well, I also read Wolf Hall, which is about this time period, but from the perspective of Thomas Cromley, for example. So I guess I have consumed a fair few things about this time period, and maybe because of that, I was just like, move on. I'm not here for it. My camera is about to die from heat, so I hope it can stay with us, because I just have one more book to talk about, okay? And that is Green and Deadly Things by Jen Lyons. So this is the Broken Binding edition, and I'm a little bit disappointed with this one, I gotta say, because this is just a fun adventure fantasy romp, but that's it, okay? So this is a story in which we're looking at our protagonist called Mathiak, and Mathiak is a young boy who is basically an apprentice in this sort of like knight society, and so he wants to become an actual knight, but for that he has to manifest a weapon. Once he manifests a weapon, he will be a full-on knight. However, he has not managed to do so, and he is sort of like 10 years older or so than when people expects you to be able to do so for the first time. Now, Mathiak, through circumstances, ends up waking up a Grim Lord, which, you know, doesn't sound great. And so this adventure kind of gets him banished from the knighthood and leads to a big adventure that he will go on together with this Grim Lord. Now, this, as I said, I was a bit disappointed in it just because I have read Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons and I absolutely love it. And since then, she has written 2 books and both of them have been standalone fantasies. And yeah, they just don't have the same sort of level of intricacies and developments within them as the Chorus of Dragons series does. So I'm always just expecting too much, I guess, from this. And don't get me wrong, I like the existence of standalone fantasy and the fact that you can have these sort of like smaller scale, fun adventure story fantasies that you can kind of consume on their own, and that you don't have to like keep up with a 3-book series in which every book is 600 pages long and whatever, and keep up with all the events in past books in order to dive into the new books. I like that, but for some reason I'm always expecting like the best of the best when I go into a Gen Lions, and this was just fun and a good time, and I enjoyed some of the explorations that happen within this book, some of the thematics that happen within this book, but ultimately I cannot help it. Jen, you raised the bar too high with the Chorus of Dragons series, and now I'm just, you know, I just want more. I want you to write another big series, I guess, because I'm very happy to have had the standalones, and I definitely enjoyed this one more than I enjoyed the Sky on Fire, is that what the other one was called? But yeah, it's still not enough. But there are some relationship within this that I very much enjoyed. There is a sort of like, you know, sort of like enemies role between two of these boys at the knighthoods thing that I was already from the beginning hoping that that would kind of like that relationship would shift at some point throughout the book, and that definitely did. The sort of like enemies to lovers side between our protagonist and the Grim Lord I enjoyed. As is the case with many Gen Lions books, this is also openly queer without making any fuss about it. There is a trans character in the beginning. That character does talk about getting some smack from other characters, but we do also have these knights who are basically releasing their sexual tension, and they can only do so on each other, and that is very much just sort of like talked about as if it's normal and not sort of like something to be ashamed of or whatever. And yeah, I enjoy that a lot as well. And then I enjoy the exploration of our character, their power, their backstory. There was a story having to do with betrayal that I suspected from the beginning, so to that extent I felt it was a little bit predictable. It was very much like clear that was gonna be the way that we were going forward, so that maybe also just like ended up destroying my enjoyment, like not destroying but like lowering my enjoyment for it a little bit more, and yeah, ultimately I had a good time with this one, and that is all positive. But yeah, as I said, I am a little bit disappointed. But so yeah, that is my reading for the month of April. I'll have a visual over here that will show you the progress I made on my TBR. And I actually don't even know, by the end, I think I landed on 27 on the final. I think I landed on 27 books on the TBR at the end of April. I'm not entirely sure with what I went into March, but like definitely there was a lot coming in throughout the month of April, and I do feel like I have read a decent amount physically here, right? I've held up quite a fair few, so that's like what's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 physical books that were also on, like that I own, rather than one of them is from the library. But of course some of these also got added in the month of April itself, so it isn't necessarily like they reduced the number that we went into April with. But okay, we'll see. I'm expecting for May to solve this, for May to be a month in which I'm gonna be tackling my physical TBR. Have I started doing so? No. I have just started with a massive Murderbot re-listen. I don't own these books physically, so they don't do anything when it comes to that. But also I'm having an amazing time with it, and it's only the 2nd of May. So with that, I'm gonna end this video right now. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys for a future one. Bye!